We're now going to take questions from the audience. We've got a few minutes for discussion. You've heard three very interesting perspectives of what's going on in Chicago from a developer, from a city financial perspective, and from a technical perspective. So there's lots of interesting conversations you can have later, and I hope that there will be some questions from the floor. I know I certainly have a few for each of the speakers. So can we raise the lights a little bit so we can see what's going on? So can you, there are 4 roving mics. Please stand up to ask your question. I will point to, if I can see anyone, I will point to where the questions are going to come from. And I'd like to start it off with a question for Eric and Andy. Can you tell us perhaps what the sustainable drivers of your portfolio are and how much you're getting into trying to reduce energy use in your buildings?
Do you want to start and then I can?
Sure. The sustainability elements are somewhat newer than some of the projects, such as the Chicago project. At the time when we started it, there was not much in the way of a track record for significant sustainability elements in residential and hotel type buildings. What we did was we maximized those elements that were available to us, such as the very high efficiency exterior envelope glass to reduce the air conditioning and heating loads in the building, the most efficient mechanical type systems, variable speed drives, and various other types of energy saving mechanisms and equipment. One of the conundrums of sustainability in residential buildings is the tension or the opposite diversity of the people who live in an apartment want to live a certain way, and it's hard to dictate to them that they're not going to turn down their thermostats or they're going to leave their lights on when they go out or things of that nature. So a lot of the automated systems that are available out there are targeted mostly towards commercial type installations where you actually, as the landlord or as the commercial operator, you can control these factors, and the people that work there, and they have to accommodate them. When it comes to a luxury residence, you know, we can't put ourselves in a position where we tell people that they have to use fluorescent lamps in their bedrooms or things of that sort. Those become personal matters, and it's, you know, as better products come out and as people get more used to it, I think these will improve.
Now, Dave, I think you actually had the best example yesterday. You said to me that the most energy efficient buildings are empty buildings, which from a developer standpoint isn't typically acceptable. I think from a more responsible standard and having corporate responsibility to be green, there are a lot of efforts we take. I think a lot of them, as Andy mentioned, have really come out in the last couple of years, and you know, obviously they get incorporated in projects going forward. I think going back as a whole portfolio, we've spent a lot of time looking at all of our buildings, and these aren't just buildings that we've built in the last decade. These are buildings that were built long before I was born. My father was born in many cases. 40 Wall Street, you know, the Delmonico Hotel that we have, that's now a residential building, and you know, so many different little proactive things you can do. Even in the building I currently live in, installing just basic motion sensors in stairwells, so lights aren't on 24 hours a day, saves tremendous amount of money. In fact, in my case, it saved my building. It paid for itself in 1 year. The variable frequency drive, so the motors, when they're not being utilized, don't have to run at 100%. Different light bulbs in the back of house spaces, more energy efficient uses in the back of house spaces where you're not impacting that quality of living, and many others. And so there's certainly many economic benefits for it that we notice, and many things that we have implemented, and I think we're excited to see this trend go forward.
Let me just say one additional thing that I glossed over. We also have green roofs at all the setbacks in the building, which is an initiative the city is pushing, I know, and it's something that we implemented, and it seems to be a nice positive thing. And additionally, we're also using water to cool the air conditioning system, river water, which saves the environment from the point of view of heat being dissipated into the atmosphere and tremendous amounts of water being discharged into the atmosphere. So by doing that, we're reducing greatly the water usage of the building as well as the energy that's dissipated into the atmosphere.
Great. Top right, there was a question. If you want to ask a question, it's very difficult to see from here. Can you put your hand up? And top right, and next.
It's very interesting what Andy had to say about phased occupancy. And being from an economics background, I have many clients who've struggled over the years to successfully do that with tall buildings, and I'm not sure there are that many examples around the world where that's been the case. In terms of the tenant occupying what is in effect a building site, what measures did you have to put in place to mitigate that?
Well, I spoke about that a little bit during my speech. There were lots and lots of things. It's a fairly extensive list of items. One of the major elements was the logistical approach to the period during which there were two different activities going on. So we had a completely separate set of entrances for the occupants of the building and the residents, and a separate entrance for all the construction workers and all the materials, supplies, and trash removal and so forth from the construction site. So it's almost like we divided the building into two separate buildings with separate entrances, separate elevators, separate access. And then in addition to that, we also had to take significant measures to separate noise, dust, dirt, all kinds of environmental factors from intruding in the living space. So that just added to the complexity of the process. It's not just that when the space is ready, you can occupy it while construction goes on. You have to make provisions to make sure that those people that occupy the building actually have a fully functional building that feels like a regular building. It doesn't feel like a construction site. Now, that may not be something that you can achieve 100%, and there's going to be some compromises that are necessary. There may be protective coverings at the entrances, for the walkways, because there's activity going on overhead. But in general, if you take the approach of almost two separate buildings and two separate sets of activities, that's what we did. And it took extensive items of little detail that had to be taken care of to make it work. But it worked fairly well, and we had very few complaints from residents who were in the building early on because of the construction.
Okay, thank you. Next.
I have a question for Mr. Testa. Developers have found that private financing sources are much more receptive versus chartered banks. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I'm not really familiar with that distinction. I think we all know that the commercial mortgage-backed securities market now is practically frozen, very little new issuance. There's quite an overhang of existing debt that will need to be rolled over here in the next few years. So it's very problematic. Compared to residential, it's a smaller portion of the total market, and it really is more of a banking problem than even the residential mortgage situation debt market was. So that, I would think increasingly that I'm guessing going forward that private financing is probably going to be a better bet or a greater source of financing than the banking sector. At least that's what we see here in the Midwest, but I think in the United States it's somewhat just as pervasive, that the amount of debt and delinquent loans, questionable assets as rents go down in hotel space and retail and all the others really across the board. It's quite a problem for banks going forward as they restructure, and it'll probably take some time to work out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself when you ask next over here?
Yes, my name is Jan Klerks, Council on Tall Buildings. I think my question is more for the Trump organization. When I think of Trump, I mean, everything about Trump is iconic, and the way you embody it is by building very iconic buildings. The way we define it now is it's a super tall, very eye-catching building. But in the light of the name of the conference, the evolution of the skyscraper, we're distinguishing as few crises, and a crisis is always a period of change and something new. How would you think the Trump organization is going to define iconic buildings in the future? Maybe it's going to be improved tall buildings, or you're going to move away from tall buildings into something else that's going to define iconic building in the future?
Well, I think for a private company, it's actually a very interesting question. We're at a great advantage over most public companies. We can have life cycles. Clearly, it's no secret to anybody in this room that real estate goes in waves. There's ebbs and troughs, and if you're uniquely positioned as we are, you can capitalize off of both of them. In the great markets, you build big buildings and you build iconic structures. In the poor markets, in the markets, to go to that last question, where you can't get financing to put up these structures, and even maybe more detrimental, you can't get end loan financing for the buyers who ultimately want to buy in the project. You spend that time, hopefully, buying assets at pennies on the dollar, either existing assets that are built, or collecting the land in which, when the next cycle comes back around, you can build that next iconic tower. And so I think this room is probably a great representation, the fact that it's certainly not over for tall buildings just because we're in a bit of a recession right now. You see what's happening in Asia, you see what's happening in the Middle East. Certainly the areas of the country, such as Chicago, that continue to promote development, many, many more tall buildings will go up here. It's just a factor of acquiring the land, teeing up these projects, and waiting for the economy to come back. And it's, again, certainly not dead. And we will be doing, I can assure you, I will be doing with Andy and my father and my family and my siblings, many more of these to come.
Thank you. Top right, I think there was a question. Are there any more questions? I have one, which is, I wonder why you were so close to being the tallest building in America for the Trump. Why didn't you go there?
I think Andy can speak a little bit to this. The first meeting we actually had, Trump International Hotel and Tower Chicago was going to be the largest building, the tallest building in the world when we first designed it. And our initial plan for the building came out a week before 9/11. Our subsequent meeting actually happened the morning of 9/11, and I think it was deemed at that time that it might not be the most posh, to use a I guess bad word for it, thing to be the tallest building in the world, especially from a residential standpoint. Clearly, that day affected everybody in this country, a lot of people around the world, and clearly made you rethink of how you had to build these structures. And if there was ever a time to doubt going extremely high, it was certainly that day. And I think we will stay at number 2. I think we're perfectly happy there. And but that was the situation. Actually, you were in that meeting that day.
Yeah. Yes, I was here in Chicago on 9/11 in SOM's offices, and it was a rather sad day that I'll never forget. But just to the point, this is part of the development business, and in order to be successful in this business, you have to be flexible. And I think that as a private company, that flexibility is very important to us, and we use it. And we evaluate each location and each situation and the timing and so forth as to what works for us at that time. And this is what worked at the time when we designed this building. That's not to say that tomorrow we might not be designing the world's tallest building, or we might not be designing something else. The object of the game is to be able to stay flexible and keep current with what works in the marketplace so that you can stay in business and continue on going on. If you build the wrong thing at the wrong time, then you end up going nowhere.
And to, I think, the question, I think one last part to add is, aside from going from 150 stores, which was originally going to be, to where we stand right now, we also changed the use of this building several times throughout the development, and really, I think, settled with a structure that's worked very well with us in other properties that we're building around the world right now. But this originally was a commercial building. After 9/11, we shrunk the height of it, and we changed it into a little bit of a hybrid, one that we developed on 1 Central Park West in New York, which was a hotel component and then a residential component above that. We really have always liked the combination because it really exploits a lot of synergies, specifically a common use of certain amenities. So in the case of Chicago, we have an Olympic-sized swimming pool, very high up in the building that both the residences can use, that both the hotel can use. Clearly, it would be an impractical thing to build if you were simply trying to build that for one of the two components, but if they can both utilize it in their own ways, they both pay for it, you can over-amenitize a building, which, from my standpoint, from the standpoint of being the next generation who's trying to keep and trying to further grow an unbelievable brand, really a brand that stands for the biggest, the best, the most luxurious, is very important. But along those lines, it gives you the flexibility that if the hotel market in Chicago is absolutely booming, well, then you can eat into a little bit of the residential section above. If the residential is really doing well, as it was for us, you can make that a larger component of your building. And given the time it takes to build a structure of the size we built, it was very important to be able to do that.
That's very interesting to see the drivers of mixed-use development. We have time for one last question before we wrap it up for the day.
David.
Can you please say your name and introduce yourself?
Anthony Wood, Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. I think it's interesting that, my question is actually directed to Richard, but I think it's really interesting that we have two projects represented at the table here, perhaps conceived roughly about the same time. We have the Trump building, and as a reaction to the 9/11 events, there was a shrinking down from that possible title of America's tallest, or tallest in the US, and then we have the Chicago Spire project. And I know Richard's concentrated on the technical aspects of the Spire today, but I just wondered if Richard could give a few insights from the whole project team on the Chicago Spire. Why the Chicago Spire? What were the motivations behind aiming for the tallest building in the US? And I think at the time, actually tallest in the world.
Where's Garrett Kelleher and Santiago Calatrava when I need them? I'm not sure it necessarily started that way. I think it just developed that way. And I think it really comes out of the combination of the enthusiasm of Shelbourne and the vision of Santiago Calatrava. And I think if you look at the history of Chicago, okay, there's been a history in Chicago for the 600-plus meter building, or the 2,000-foot-high building, all right? There was attempts made towards that with the Miglin-Beitler building. There was another building Harry Weiss was doing many years ago that almost got there. So I think it was the culmination of a collective wish that was in this city that fostered that kind of approach to go to this type of height.
Is there any discussion about shrinking down from height?
No, absolutely not. Okay. And remember, we started this project many years after 9/11, and I think we had already gotten into the thinking in the industry that high-rises and super high-rises were still here to stay. That said, there was a tremendous emphasis in the design of the building on security, redundancy, and safety to make sure it's state-of-the-art as far as a redundant, safe building goes.
Thank you, Richard. We're going to wrap it up now. As the session comes to a close, I hope that you will agree it's been a very stimulating opening to our 2 days of discussion. I'm sure you will have more questions for the panel, which you can ask them during the 30-minute break that we'll be having. We're going to be restarting at 11:15. The 30-minute coffee break is sponsored by SOM, and I'd also like to thank Viracom, who is our platinum sponsor, for their help in putting this together. When you're having your coffee break, please visit the exhibition gallery in the poster session and return here when the session bell rings at 11:15. And finally, as a token of appreciation from the Council, I have a small gift for them, and I'd like you to join me in thanking them for coming here in a conventional way. Thank you very much.